I'm recording my homily for the feast day of the Epiphany in this Christmas season. We're now in 2020. I know I've missed a couple weeks there. I'm going to try and make up my homilies, but we'll see if that happens. I fell a little behind, okay? But feast day of the Epiphany. So I had an altar server come up to me this weekend at one of the masses, and right before we're going to begin Mass, we're standing in line to begin processing in, and he turns around to me and he says, "Father, are we about to have World War III?" It's really hard to answer that question in 30 seconds, right? And I don't even remember what I said. I don't think I said anything very intelligible. Interesting question for a teenager to have on his mind right as we're going to begin Mass, right? So obviously, I think this was something that he wanted to ask me and felt like, well, I guess here's a moment where I can do it, right? Okay. Are we about to have World War III? Well, for a teenager, this question, it's interesting. For a teenage boy, this question, in some ways, there's a conflict within inside, because it seems adventurous. It seems like a break from this normal, boring routine that we inflict upon our teenagers, where they go to school every day, and it's just a boring routine, especially for boys, right? They're just not wired that way. And so maybe they think of the war as like this exciting diversion or escape, right? But anybody who's read about wars, who's read about accounts of war, we know that it is an absolutely hellish, horrible, horrible thing where millions and millions of people die, and those who survive are never the same. It really and truly traumatizes the entire world and an entire generation of people. Declarations of war. We can look at the Middle East, and as adults we have a little more maturity, and so we say, that what happened this last week, could cause a war, but it doesn't necessarily sound like it's enough to cause a world war, right? And so we step back and we say, okay, this is really, really bad, but we've been there before many, many times. The Middle East is just constantly fomenting. It's like an active volcano that's constantly waiting to erupt, right? Lots of hatred in the Middle East. But let's think about this for a moment a little closer to home. When a husband and wife are declaring war on each other, right? With little things, with big things. When brothers and sisters, siblings, or adult siblings don't get along and are always picking at each other and fighting with each other, and often it's because of past hurts. It's just like the Middle East, right? Or you think of at work, when there's this constant animosity towards co-workers or towards the boss, or, it's like the Middle East. People are constantly ready to declare war. They're almost looking for a reason to declare war, just to get back. Okay. So the Epiphany is like the opposite. So in the book of Isaiah, which we read from on Sunday, there's this image of Jerusalem as this giant holy city up on the mountain, right? And this mountain is emitting this bright light, this brilliant light. And it's so bright that people from 1,000 miles away, so think of the Magi, right? 1,000 miles away can see this light. And it's coming from a specific direction. They're looking at the source of this light. They're looking and they're saying 1,000 miles away, there's this light. It's this city. It's like on fire. It's not on fire, but it's so bright, right? Now, what's interesting about this prophecy is that in this moment, it's almost like you can't quite tell, is this light coming from God or is it coming from the city? Because the light is coming down on the city, but then being emitted out, right? Well, I would say it's both and. It's God as the source, but he's shining the light out through the city. He wants people to be drawn to this holy city. Now, we're using symbolic language here, all right? So to understand, what does it mean to have the entire world see a light and want to be drawn to it? The star, right? The Magi from the east, 1,000 miles away, are being drawn by this light, by this star. And the new temple is going to be Jesus Christ. All right. Pretty cool, right? Pretty interesting. Now, in this prophecy in Isaiah, there's this movement of all the nations coming to Jerusalem. And they're coming to Jerusalem with lots and lots of gifts, gold and incense and the things that you heard about the Magi, but they're bringing all kinds of other things, dromedaries, and I don't even know what dromedaries is, but all kinds of things. Now, in the Old Testament, were there moments of declarations of war? Lots of bloodshed in the Old Testament. But there's some beautiful stories where a person or persons makes a decision to declare peace. And you know how they do that? They gather up everything they can, all the riches that they can, and this is something that the entire nation participates in. Everybody contributes to this treasure, if you will. And then with camels and donkeys and horses and anything, they bring all of this treasure to this nation that they want peace with. They want to prove, this is how they prove that they want peace. It's a declaration of peace. And so the symbol of the Magi is that the world wants to declare peace with God. It doesn't want to be at war with God. It wants to declare peace. Well, does it feel like that right now? Does it feel like the world wants to declare peace with God? Not always. But it seems like maybe the things that we go through here helps us at some point to say, enough is enough. We want to declare peace with God. We want to show our peace. Now, when this nation comes, or these nations come and want to declare peace and bring all these gifts, it's not that they just want to declare peace and then go back home. They want to be united. In fact, one could say, on some level, they want to become one. They want to become one nation. Have to have a lot of humility to be able to do that as a nation, right? Okay, so again, let's step back. Think about families, husbands and wives. In those moments when you don't necessarily feel like declaring peace, but you do. Now, I know this sounds silly, but what are some ways that you hear about husbands and wives declaring peace? Well, dad comes home with a bouquet of roses, right? Because they had a big fight the night before, or something like that. There should be evidence of a declaration of peace between siblings who are fighting each other, saying we're sorry, right? At work, we apologize to our boss if we've done something wrong. You know, it's those moments where you say, I want to declare peace, and I want to end the war. Now, as Christians, we are to be part of that, always, in our world. We are people who go around declaring peace, not war. Are there times when we need to defend and we need to protect? Yes. But we are a people who go to declare peace. Now, so that's why the Magi are a great example to us. Now, the Magi bring gifts. They don't bring trinkets, right? They don't bring something little that's just symbolic. They bring a chunk of their stuff, right? Now, they're not giving Jesus everything that they own, okay? In this moment, I think that would be a mistake to say they gave everything. They didn't give everything, but they gave a chunk of themselves. These are not just symbolic. It's like gold. Think of not just a little bit of gold, but gold, right? And the incense, and all these things are things of great value for the Magi. They want to demonstrate their desire for peace and unity with this new king. Now, let's imagine for a moment. We're going to take this in a little different direction. What I'm about to say is not a criticism of the Magi, okay? But it is only the beginning. The Magi represent only the beginning, because in that moment, when they give these gifts, that's great, that's beautiful, there's lots of symbol in that. And then they go home, and so there's this assumption of this peace, but Jesus wants to do more, right? He wants to transform. And you don't see that in this story of the Magi. So let's take it to the next level. So let's pretend for a moment you go before Jesus, right? Now, let's imagine Jesus, let's say you're in this dream. Let's say you're dreaming, right? And you imagine in your dream that you go before Jesus and he's an adult, so he's your peer. And he comes to you, like a dream, how dreams are. He comes to you with his hands out open, and there's nothing in his hands. But it's clear he's asking you for something. And you feel in this dream, it's clear that kind of like the Magi, he's asking you, Jesus is asking you for what is most valuable to you. So you think about it, you pray about it, and you come up with something that's of value to you. So you come and you bring it to Jesus, you place it in his hands, and he's so happy. He's so happy, he's so joyous, because Jesus does want to use the material things that we have in our lives. He wants to use it for his glory, for the greater glory of the church, for expressions of love in our family. He does want us to use material things for that. So he receives it with great joy. He's very sincere. And then he takes it and he puts it down next to himself. So you can almost think of the Magi putting the gifts down in front of Jesus. And then Jesus takes his hands and he does this again. You're like, uh-oh, I thought I just gave him everything, right? Or the most important thing to me. And Jesus has his hands out again. So you think and you pray deeper about it, and it's like, okay. And you come up with something, and you're ready to give it, but it's like, oh man, this is going to hurt. I don't know if I want to give this up. I don't know if I want to give this away, right? But it's Jesus. So you give it to him. And he's so happy. He receives it. He takes it. And he puts it down, and he puts his hands back out. Now, it's like, well, what do I give him? What do I give him? So there was a priest a few years ago I was talking to, and he went and did a 30-day retreat. And these 30-day retreats are in silence, right? So lots and lots of time in prayer. And he said at about day 4, he was out of things to say to God. He's like, God, I'm all prayed out. I have nothing left to say. And you feel like this moment where you just feel like you're just melting because there's like nothing left. Can you imagine 30 days of silence? I think for some people, after 2 days, they would just explode. When he had nothing left to say, that's when real prayer begins. When we have nothing left to say, that is when real prayer begins. Because that's when we go back to Jesus and we say, Jesus, I have nothing left to give you except myself. And so at some point, we reach this movement in our hearts where we say, Jesus, I give to you myself. And you know what he says? I accept. Now, this is a movement of being like the Magi that have things to give, right? But becoming a disciple, maturing in our relationship with God to where we give ourselves. I'm reading this book right now. Oh, I don't have it on me. So in the United States, we have one martyr who was American, right? Who was born in America and became a martyr. We only have one. It's kind of sad when you think about it. We should all go do something about that. Okay, we have one martyr. He's from Oklahoma. He became a missionary priest down in Guatemala, and through the course of the instability down there, he was killed. and he is now a blessed in the Catholic Church. He's not yet canonized a saint, but he's a blessed, so he's considered a martyr by the Church. But there's this, in this book written about him, his name is Father Stanley Rother. In this book written about him, there's this point where he's talking about one of his mentor priests, a priest that he had growing up. And this priest would say, he was talking about stewardship, and he would say, okay, great, people, you gave me your money. Now I want your blood. Now, he actually had that in two meanings. One, he needed vocations. He wanted vocations. He's like, now I want your children to become part of the church and help to be leadership in the church, right? But he's saying, I want you. Okay. So at these moments where Jesus, he says, we say, okay, Jesus, all right, Jesus, I give you myself. And he says, I accept it, right? Now, this movement is from being one of the Magi who bring gifts from a distant land to becoming one of Jesus' own people who also came to the Nativity, right? They were the shepherds. And so shepherds have like nothing, right? They're poor. They have nothing, but they have the necessities, right? So you think of the things a shepherd would probably need, they'd have that on them, right? Right? But they come to Jesus with no gifts. Now, in most nativity scenes, they'll show a shepherd boy with a sheep or a lamb around his shoulders. And I think there's a little bit of beauty there, because when we give of ourselves, we give of our time and our efforts and our work, right? Well, what does a shepherd do? A shepherd guards and protects the sheep. That's what he does. And so you think of us as disciples. As we become disciples, we become shepherds who guard and protect and feed and nurture the sheep. Our brothers and sisters, each other, right? And when we assume a role of leadership, we then do that for others. But we do that without really bringing gifts, stuff, right? This is when we give of ourselves. Pretty cool, right? Okay, there's a very, very old movie. You may have seen it. I'm not referring to the newer one that came out, 6, 7 years ago, but the really old one from the 1950s, Ben-Hur. All right, Ben-Hur. So in this story of Ben-Hur, Ben-Hur is a man who has everything. He's like the Magi. He has everything. But then he loses everything because of war, because of the conflict between the Romans and the Jews. And so he loses everything. But through the course of this story, he encounters Jesus in these very unique encounters. And Jesus very slowly begins a process of transforming him from being like the Magi to being more like a shepherd, right? Okay, but through the course of the story, he also encounters one of the Magi, one of the original Magi who came to Jesus. And this Magi is coming back 30 years later, 33 years later, however many years later, to see this baby that he came to see, but to see him as a young man. He wants to see, who did he become? Did he become a king? And as he comes back not as royalty with a ton of servants and gifts and camels, and he doesn't. He's not poor either, but he comes back as a simple man. He comes back just almost as an ordinary person, just as a traveler. But he wants to see Jesus as a man. And this story comes to this culmination where he does, right at the week that Jesus gives his life. And so this Magi comes back just in time to see Jesus claiming his kingdom as king. All right, God bless you, and I will see you next week.